Good afternoon. I'm Patricia Van Skyke, Director of the Lloyd Library and Museum in Cincinnati, Ohio. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's Building Your Herbal Library with Meghan Henshaw. The Lloyd Library was founded more than 140 years ago by three brothers who were pharmacists and manufactured nature-based medicine. To support their research, they collected books about plants, nature, and medicine from around the world, dating back to the 1400s. The search for nature-based medicine continues today. Individuals and practitioners are building their own personal libraries on the topic. For today's lecture, we turn to Meghan Henshaw. She's a well-respected herbalist, someone we know through her research here at the Lloyd, and I've visited her garden. Meghan has her hands in all aspects of herbals for more than 20 years, including working on FDA approval and the American Botanical Council on herb clips. She received her Bachelor of Science from Bastyr University and has a Master of Science in Ethnobotany from the University of Kent. In addition, Meghan has her own practice where she makes products and consults in addition to her community garden. Please join me in welcoming Meghan Henshaw. Hi, Meghan.
Hello. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you for that introduction. Yeah, for sure. My name is Meghan Henshaw, and I've been really privileged to use this space as an independent researcher for over 10 years. When I was living out in the Southwest Desert, I would use the collections at the Lloyd, and I would email Erin in particular and say, you know, can you pull these books? And she'd have a cart waiting for me. And this space is a really lovely spot because it's just incredible to have physical text in front of you versus stuff that's online, because there's a lot of information that's online, as we know, and it can be quite difficult to figure out what is legit and what is not legit. So to be able to physically hold these books, and the Lloyd is just this massive repository of these very notable botanical books. Like even when I was studying abroad, I was using WorldCat to look up the books that I needed for my dissertation, and they all were physically here, which I took as a really good sign because I was moving back there. So but they were good. But so I went to Bastyr University in Seattle, a little bit north of Seattle, and then I did my MS in ethnobotany. So ethnobotany is really just a fancy way of saying that people interacting with plants. It just is more in the same line. Like, so I'm an herbalist by trade, but ethnobotany is more of the academic sort of study of plants for lots of different purposes. There are ethnobotanists that specifically look at trees that are used in Polynesian boat building, and like mulberry and the influence of silkworm production. It can be highly, highly specific. But I'm an herbalist, and that's really what inspires this talk today, is really giving you all information about how you can figure out whether books are good quality or not, and you can build your own herbal library so that you can cross-reference when you're looking things up online. You're trying to figure out, like, okay, I'm reading this thing, is this a commonly understood aspect of this particular plant, or is this person like way out in left field? So it helps to have physical books to be able to cross-reference. So characteristics of quality botanical books. So the first thing is you really want to have a searchable author. You want to be able to sleuth out who this person is that's writing this book. You want to find their website. Maybe they don't have a website, but they have social media. You want to be able to figure out where their educational background comes from. And so that could be with mentorship. It doesn't have to be via academic institutions, because there's lots of legitimate ways of studying plants and having a deep knowledge without going to university. Especially amongst more traditional societies where it's an intergenerational exchange of information. You want to look for their speaking engagements. You just really want to be able to kind of start pulling on these threads of who this person is and figure out where they've been, who's connected to them, because the big concern is really AI generated herb books, and they're definitely out there. I was looking up, just trying to figure out some of the years of publication for the books that I'm talking about today. And they definitely came up on Amazon. So, if you can search the author and you can figure out who they are and where they went to school and who likes them, and they're actually real people that are interacting with each other, then that's a good sign. So you want to look at the book, and ideally it's going to have Latin names as well as common names. You know, common names can be, I mean, you can have the same common name for vastly different plants. So if they have Latin name and common name, that's also helpful to be able to cross-reference to make sure that, you know, okay, like we're looking at Mentha spicata, so that's spearmint, you know, is this actually spearmint, or is this author talking about something totally different that they're calling spearmint? And then references cited. So, you know, we are a very Western-minded society these days, and we rely deeply on clinical studies. You know, we're always looking for where the sources are. That applies for the medical industry as well as journalism. You know, you want to be able to figure out where this information came from. And it's no different with herbal books. You know, you want to have this overall sense of transparency around where the information comes from. If somebody says that they're self-taught and they're not talking about their teachers that they learned from, that to me would raise a red flag, because everybody learns from other people. And I want to really feel confident that someone is being truthful about where their information comes from. And yeah, recommended by other published authors that are real people. So not big people. And then a big red flag would be a book that's only available as an ebook, and then when you do a search for the author, there's no history of the author that's found. So that to me I would be suspicious that it was an AI generated book. And often there'll be like these big compendiums, like encyclopedia of, Bible of, like, you know, just very general sort of ebooks. So the first one that we'll talk about is AfricanAmerican Herbalism, which is by Lucretia Van Dyke. So this book was published in 2022, and I had the pleasure of hearing her speak at the American Herbalist Guild Conference last fall. And she is a Southern herbalist. She really focuses on herbs that she uses in her community in the South. And this book is a real gift to the herbal community, because she's done a lot of historical research around herbal medicine's grandmothers, such as Emma Dupree and other midwives and herbalists from the 1800s and early 1900s. And she also does bios of current living herbalists. And so often, you know, just like with artists, sometimes we don't really recognize what we have until they're already passed. And so she has really focused a big effort in this book of highlighting and lifting up the people that are doing really incredible work within the African-American herbalist community that are living right now. So she also talks about recipes, ceremonies for self-transformation, spiritual bathing, and kitchen medicine. So kitchen medicine is using like culinary herbs, but in a medicinal capacity. So like you can do kitchen medicine with sage or oregano or thyme. So really accessible kind of herbal medicine. And so she covers the history of African-American herbalism, Yoruba traditions. So those are traditions that originate on the western coast of Africa, around Benin and Nigeria. And she also talks about the impacts of the transatlantic slave trade on herbalism and the destruction that really caused in the transmission of information. And she talks about a lot of different plants, but some of the ones that I'll just mention would be aloe, castor, mullein, poke, which there's tons of poke that's up right now. Sassafras, the tree that is just gorgeous and has these like mitten-shaped leaves. Tobacco, and also 32 others. So this next book, The Handmade Apothecary by Vicki Chown and Kim Walker, this is published in 2018 and by some British authors. So one of them is a medical herbalist, and then the other one is a historical plant researcher at Kew Gardens, which for the botanical nerds in the audience, Kew Gardens is very well known. So they're slightly different formulations because they are, you know, really rooted in British tradition. So they have different plants, but there's also tons of overlap too. So, you know, using that book as a plant person in the United States is very useful. So it's a good book for budding herbalists, very accessible way of writing. The chapters are broken up into systems of the body, so cardiovascular, digestive, reproductive, immune, musculoskeletal, nervous system, skin, respiratory, and urinary tract. So, you know, if you're having a respiratory issue and you're thinking like, well, what can I do about it? It's not that serious yet, but I can tell that it's just present in my throat, like in my upper chest. I've got a little bit of time. I'm going to sit down and review this section on the respiratory system. And it's just it's a lovely like compendium of information. It's not overwhelming, which sometimes, I mean, I spend a lot of time looking at herb books, and some of them you open them up and you're like, wow, this is going to take me 4 hours to review this information. And it's very succinct. So they also have a great chapter on children's health and very creative recipes. So there's a chamomile bedtime latte that's listed, immune gummies, and anti-allergy ice lollies, which are popsicles. And yeah, succinct plant profiles and stunning photos. So just to give you a sense of some of the images in there. So there's a cleansing Cleavers cold infusion on the left. So cucumber Cleavers, which is an early spring plant. It's known as an alternative, so really supportive for cleansing to the lymphatic system, and it's a quote unquote blood purifier is how it's written about in a lot of older traditional books. And then on the right are some immune gummies, immune gut health gummies. So we're just really pretty book. So the modern herbal dispensatory is by Thomas Easley and Stephen Horn. So both of them are very experienced herbalists. Thomas Easley started seeing clients when he was like 19, and he lived in the South, and he now, I think, is in West Virginia. And then Stephen Horn teaches at an herbal school somewhere on the East Coast. I can't quite remember, but this is really a medicine making guide. So for people that are interested in making their own herbal medicine at home, this is an incredible, rich repository of info. And I think that they've made it very easy for folks to just work with what they've got. So you don't need a lot of fancy equipment. It's written in very clear language, very user friendly. So it covers the basics of extraction methods. So how you're going to pull out the medicinal compounds in the plants. So those could be decoctions, which are simmered over low heat for a while. They could be infusions, which would be like a cup of tea would be an infusion. Syrups, there's acid tracks, which are extractions into vinegar. He reviews all of that. There's also aromatherapy and flower essences that are highlighted, and so flower essences are more appropriate for supporting the more emotional side of the body. And then there's profiles of 235 herbs, and there's info on actions and safety, energetics. So, cayenne, think about the energetics of cayenne as being very warming. So, if you eat a lot of spicy food, you're going to notice all of a sudden it's going to feel like all the blood is in your face. So it has a more uplifting upward movement to it. So that would be a type of energetics of thinking about herbs within that lens. There's also a great listing of sourcing. So I'm happy to answer those questions afterwards too if people are curious about where to get herbs. But he has a nice list of small and medium farms if you want to buy things. And then dosage, which dosage can be tricky because our bodies are all really different. And, if we have impaired digestive qualities or if we got our gallbladder removed, like those things are really going to impact how herbs are going to relate to the body. But he does go into dosage, which can be really helpful because it's a tricky thing to learn. He includes formulas on medicinal syrups and alcohol extracts, which are known as tinctures, glycerites, which are alcohol-free extracts that are made with glycerin, which is like a syrupy substance that's sourced from soy or palm. And also infused oils, suppositories, eye washes, liniments, salves, and lotions. So wide range of different types of herbal applications. Do people know who Rosemary Gladstar is? Yeah. She's a lovely, lovely person. So this is a book that she wrote in 2008, Herbal Recipes for Vibrant Health. And it's not a big book, but it's really packed with a lot of great information. And, this book is really focused on herbal medicine for the whole family. And it features specific formulas for all stages of life. So, she talks about great herbs for kids, really good vitality and mental health and hormone support for folks in their later years. There's chapters on health issues specific to women and men. And it highlights home remedies for everyday ailments and recipes for radiant beauty. So it's not just all like, oh, there's something weird that's going on, I need to deal with this. It could also be like, oh, I really want to play around with like making my own lotion because I just want to make my own lotion. So there's some nice recipes in there. There's a male toner tea, herbal shampoo, healing mouthwashes, long life elixir, and a fire cider recipe. And so fire cider, for those that don't know, is it's a potent flavored herbal extraction where vinegar is the base, and then you add in cayenne or jalapenos. You can add in horseradish and ginger and garlic. It's a very pungent immune stimulant. So some people really swear by it. I am not a fan of the stuff because I had a bad experience once and I haven't been able to get over it. But for some people, like having a big jar with fire cider in it, they just know in the winter months, if other people around them are sick, that they just do a shot of fire cider and they're good to go. And then it also describes how to make an herbal first aid kit, which I really love that because it's, there's some things that you totally can use herbs for in as a styptic to slow bleeding, having some rescue remedy type emotional support if somebody's in shock after something happens. There's some like sweet little formulas that she has in there that you can, if you make them ahead of time, put them into a big, sort of like lunch bag or a little metal box, something like that, so that you could have an herbal first aid kit. But it's a fun project to work on. So the Natural Pregnancy book by Dr. Aviva Ram, that was a book that I found through the Cincinnati Birth Center, because my office was over there for a few years. And so the midwives there were sending all their pregnant clients to me. And I mean, pregnant populations, it's a population that I work with, but it's not a specialty of mine. And so I really wanted to have some solid resources to double check information before I made any recommendations. And so this book came into my lap, and Dr. Aviva Ram she's a medical allopathic doctor, and she's also a midwife, and she's an herbalist, and she has, I think, over 25 experience. I mean, she's very, has a very well-rounded education, and she's very prolific in the books that she publishes, and she has a very active social media presence too, for folks that like to follow things that way. So it's an excellent resource, and it covers nutrition, prenatal care, common pregnancy concerns, ranging from anemia and anxiety to UTIs and varicose veins. It also lists herbs to avoid and those considered safe during pregnancy. Very common sense and grounded approach. So sometimes people will ask me really complicated questions, I mean, in general, but especially in relation to pregnancy. And I always consult this book because she has such a no-nonsense way with very minimal invasive techniques that's her default, is that she says avoid all herbs in the first trimester, really, but you can use herbs to be safe in the second and third trimester. And because she has a very clear list of what's appropriate to use, it's a great reference book, and it's perfect for new parents to be. So this is a very special book that was published just in 2022, Braiding Sweetgrass for Young Adults by Robin Wall Kimmerer. Have folks read Braiding Sweetgrass? Yeah. So honestly, I love Robin Wall Kimmerer, but Braiding Sweetgrass, I could not make my way through the adult version. It got too slow, and I got like 2/3 of the way through, and then I just gave up. But the YA adaptation is great because it's made for people with short attention span. And it's made for folks that if it's not interesting, they're just not going to read it. So there's great illustrations in it. There's really sweet prompts for people to focus in on their own self-reflection. And Robin Wall Kimmerer, she's a citizen Potawatomi Nation member. She's a scientist and a mother and a teacher. She teaches at SUNY in New York. She has a whole long list of accolades. Very also prolific writer. She just released a book on chokecherry, I think, that just came out. And she explains complex botanical concepts such as mass fruiting, mycorrhizal communication between trees, logistics of seed germination, and these are all spoken about alongside her personal and ancestral stories. And she emphasizes the importance of stories and seeing all beings in the world as kin, not just other humans. And that is a very common thread in the text that I'm going to talk about from Indigenous authors. All of those authors specifically talk about that in their books. And, you know, she wants to shift the awareness from being hyper human centric to thinking about animals and plants as having their own experience of the world. And that's part of giving thanks and gratitude, asking permission before harvest. So, you know, thinking about, well, as a human, I have intentions for harvesting this thing because I need to make this salve with it, or I want to make tea with it. But, you know, how can I ask the plant itself, because it has autonomy as well. She highlights the ways in which Western science and Indigenous traditions can be complementary. And so a good example of that is in this quote from her about the Three Sisters gardening method. So for those that don't know, the Three Sisters gardening method is using corn, beans, and squash. So corn germinates first, and so it forms a framework for the beans to grow up on, and then the squash will be right around the base of the corn and the beans, and so it creates some protection so that the water doesn't evaporate, and then the beans themselves are nitrogen fixers because they're in the Fabaceae family, and they will help to enrich the soil. So she says, Three Sisters offers us a new metaphor for an emerging relationship between Indigenous knowledge and Western science, both of which are rooted in the earth. I think of the corn as traditional ecological knowledge, the physical and spiritual framework that can guide the curious being of science. The squash creates the ethical habitat for coexistence and mutual flourishing. And I think that that illustration is so sweet of the Three Sisters. So this next book is written by, well, it's really a family affair. So it was written by Mary Sissip Genius, but it's actually the teachings of a woman named Key. And the editor for the book is Wendy McCoon's Genius, which is the author's daughter. So the author died before she finished it, and so then the daughter did all the editing. But it's really Mary's voice that you hear in this book. So this is Plants Have So Much to Give Us, All We Have to Do Is Ask, Anishinaabe Botanical Teachings. So like I mentioned, this is the teachings of Kiwe Dinakwe, which is she was an Anishinaabe Ojibwe medicine woman and ethnobotanist that was born in 1918. So she was a professor at the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. And at the time, you had to be proficient in German to take your final PhD exams, which she never was proficient in German. So she did all the classwork for her PhD, but couldn't actually get it. But she was born on the Leelanau Peninsula, which is in the northern part of the Lower Peninsula of Michigan. She talks about the belief that plants are beings with their own stories and are cognizant. And she states that all readers will go through a decolonization process as they explore another system of knowledge keeping. So really taking that human-centric perspective out of the way and thinking about things from a much more holistic, inclusive, plant-centric, animal-centric perspective. So this is a detailed account of important Anishinaabe teachings with recipes and different applications of plants, often told as rich stories. And it's, I mean, you could easily, if you had 20 minutes, you could just flip open to any section and find a plant that you were interested in. She talks about, you know, just as a smattering of the plants that she focuses on. They include birch, cedar, staghorn sumac, cattail, horsetail, and many others. So you could just, if you were interested in horsetail, you could just flip open to the horsetail section and you'll find an ancestral story about the origin of horsetail and all the animals that are connected with this plant. You know, you would find information about Mary's experience with it, and also the teachings of K, and how she used it in her practice. So it's just it's a really different kind of book because you hear so many different voices in the information. So this next one is a beautiful, I mean, you could put it on your coffee table. I mean, it's so gorgeous. And this is Iwigara, The Kinship of Plants and People by Enrique Salmon. So Enrique Salmon, his family is from the Raramuri tribe, which is one of the indigenous communities around Copper Canyon in Chihuahua, like in northern Mexico. And he's a native ethnobotanical scholar at Cal State. And he focuses on the concept that all life is connected and humans aren't more important than other life forms, but rather part of an extended ecological family. So this book highlights 80 culturally significant plants to indigenous communities all over North America. So when Enrique was reaching out and deciding what plants to talk about in this book, he reached out to other ethnobotanical scholars, folks in indigenous communities that he was connected with all over the United States and Canada. And he asked them, well, what do you think the most culturally important plants are that grow near you? And so that was really how he gleaned all this plant list together. So, you know, sometimes these books are very regionally specific, like Keys and Mary and the last book that we talked about, you know, that is really specific to the ecosystems around the Leelanau Peninsula and northern Michigan. But this is a collection of indigenous culturally significant plants from all over. So you can really get a deep sense of like, okay, like I'm in the Southwest, like let's read about what's important in the Southwest. Like, okay, I'm in the Northeast, like let's read about what's important in the Southeast or the Northeast. So stories, myths, and narratives introduce the spirit and character of each plant. And he really blends basic scientific and medicinal information with culturally specific knowledge and applications. There's beautiful photos throughout the whole book, and he's funny, and you can really hear his humor in the book too, which, I don't know, I always feel like it's 10,000 times easier to read something when it's a little bit funny. And he also shares uses, identification, harvest, and health benefits. Do folks grow medicinal plants at their house? Yeah. So I'm the next couple of books here are gonna be talking about growing and cultivation. So the first one is The Medicinal Herb Grower, which is by Richard Check, and this was published in 2009. So Richard Check and his wife, they started this company called Strictly Medicinals in 1989, and they're a great source of medicinal plant seed as well as live plants, and they're located in Oregon, so just outside of Williams, Oregon. So it contains lots of tips for home growers on how to successfully make cuttings and plant seeds, you know, especially for cold germination. He has so many like little wizardry tips on how to get stuff to germinate that has never been germinated before in the United States. And really, he talks about the key is patience and observation, just spending time with the plants in their natural habitat and watching to see what's flourishing and what's not. He shares a story about sage, about white sage, which is Salvia alpina, and that is a sacred plant on the West Coast. And, you know, it's really hard to germinate, and it's definitely been over-harvested because, I mean, you go into any crystal shop and there's white sage bundles, right? So he offers white sage seeds, and he went to go sit with the plant out in its native environment. And he noticed that right around the plant itself, there was not a lot of baby white sages. And he was like, that's weird. You know, what's going on with that? And then he ended up walking a ways, and he went into a section that there had been a recent fire, and he realized that there were little baby sages all over the ground in the area where there had been a recent fire. So he harvested some seed, he took it back to his farm in Oregon, and then he prepared 2 flats, and he used the same soil mix and the same seed that he had harvested on the same day, and he put them in the flats, and then on one of the flats, he built a fire on top, and then on the other one, he didn't. And so what he saw is that the flat that had the fire that was built on it they had much stronger germination, and the other flat, they did have some germination, but it wasn't as vigorous. And so what that means is that sage is not fire dependent, but it is fire preferential. So that's, like, those are the kinds of things that you only know if you're patient, if you pay attention, and if you're open to experimentation, so he changed one variable in that example. Observation and patience are key factors in successful plant cultivation. So this Forest Farmer's Handbook, I was just using it last week because I was putting in some American ginseng and black cohosh plants up at our family land in Michigan. And this is made for people that are doing planting and they have a bit of land that they want to see if they can get some forest woodlands, medicinals to flourish. So it's a practical guide, includes information about growing golden seal, bloodroot, black cohosh, ramps, Solomon seal, and American ginseng. So it's really geared towards small landowners that want to just sort of play around with growing some of these plants. And it shows you how to assess and prepare a site for cultivation, indicator species. So, if you can get this one plant to grow here, if you see like, oh, actually there's a plethora of bloodroot in this one spot, then that can tell you like, oh, okay, well maybe I can try growing, ramps or Solomon seal or American ginseng, because these are all going to flourish in the same type of environment. It also covers diseases and pests, plant life cycle, seed dispersal, pollination, harvesting, and propagation, and includes a lot of traditional use info and historical information and informative illustrations. So the illustrations in this book are made by this artist named Herbaceous Human. And if you've been to the United Plant Savers Sanctuary in Eastern Ohio, in Rutland, Ohio, he is the one that did all of the plaques all over the property. So super skilled illustrator. And this is American ginseng. And so you can see the seeds at the top, and then we've got the seedling to the right of the seeds. And then the one prong is the small American ginseng in its first year. And then if the American ginseng does okay, then it'll come back the second season with 2 prongs, and then the next year with 3, and then ideally 4 or maybe 5. So you can tell the age of ginseng based on the number of leaflets that it has. So this is a tome of a book right here. It's huge. It's a gigantic resource that's just published in 2023. So this is Field Guide to Edible Wild Plants by Sam Thayer. So Sam lives up in northern Wisconsin. I had the pleasure of meeting him when I was in I was probably like 19, and he was dating a friend of mine, and he's owned this land and built a log cabin on it and lived there the whole time. And I didn't bring a copy of the book, but the book itself is like this thick. And he knows from firsthand experience every single plant that he talks about, how it's harvested, the edible parts of it, the time of year that it's harvested, whether it tastes terrible if you don't do this thing. He has firsthand experience with it, which is incredible to me. And his estimate is that it took him 17,000 hours to write this book. So he says he's also very funny. So some people think of wild food knowledge as insurance against catastrophes such as getting lost, war, or the collapse of civilization. Foraging certainly could be a life-saving skill in such circumstances, but relegating wild food to dire situations is kind of like going naked until you get hypothermia. You might as well start enjoying the benefits of wild food right now. So this book is really rooted in food traditions, but it's based on his firsthand experience. So I have looked at a lot of plant books, and I have never seen anything that's been this thorough from the firsthand perspective. So he talks about historically foraging was an intergenerational activity. So you would have more experienced foragers going out with younger generations. And so you would see things just time and time again where, somebody would introduce a plant to you, and then, they would scratch the root, and they would, hold it up to the light. They would, talk about how it smells. And then over time, if you were out with this forager, you would be asked to take on more and more responsibility each year, where like you're identifying it maybe in a whole different section of the field. So, we don't always have someone that we can go out and forage with. And this book it doesn't take the place of that intergenerational, knowledge keeping, but he does a damn good job of working with what he's got. So, he talks about, how important foraging is because it connects people with their region and their culture. And he promotes foraging to really address mental and physical ailments because you're moving around, you're outside, there's stress relieving components of just being outdoors and moving around, just those two things, let alone the fact that these medicinal plants and edible plants are going to be higher in fiber and nutrient dense and really a complement to our modern diets, which are pretty lacking in a lot of departments. So it's a comprehensive field guide specifically for foragers. So lots of photos, identification keys, and information about conservation issues. He speaks about ramps in particular in a lot of detail, which I think is great because everybody loves ramps because they're delicious. He also talks about processing methods. So, in the past with, when I would be out foraging, I would have to look at a lot of different texts to be able to get all this information, but he really condensed it so that you just have to carry around one single gigantic book.
Does he have a geographic focus?
Mostly in northern, I think it says on the cover there. I think it's like northern Michigan, Wisconsin, the Midwest, but it's, goes into central the United States too. So Midwest and central. So last but not least, this is King's American Dispensatory. I didn't include a photo for this just because it's an old book and all old books sort of just look the same on the outside. But this is one of my favorite books written before the 1900s. This is by Harvey Felter and John Ray Lloyd. And so we're in the Lloyd Library, which started out as the collections of the Lloyd brothers. And so John Ray Lloyd was a very established pharmacist in Cincinnati. So King's American Dispensatory, that was written it was written actually originally in 1854 by John King. And then John King was a friend of Felter and Lloyd's. And so he had asked them to update it with different information. So Felter was an eclectic physician and Lloyd was a pharmacist. So they had very complementary but different skill sets. And I've looked at King's original text, and I have to say that Felter and Lloyd really improved it. It was kind of like reading stereo instructions, it was dense. But it's one of many classic texts used by eclectic physicians. And so eclectic physicians were more holistic doctors that were really literally run out of town by the American Medical Association, but they were the precursors to naturopathic doctors. And they used more natural means to resolve illness. Because you think about, in the 1800s, 1900s, that was a time of heroic medicine where people were, doing bloodletting, they were, applying leeches, they were using mercury. I mean, it was just, if you went to the doctor, you maybe just were worse off, And so the eclectic physicians were horrified by this, and they really used a lot of other things like hydrotherapy and herbs. So this book provides foundational information about the standardization of extracts of plants. So, just really, Lloyd was such an expert in following a recipe. He would do the exact same thing over and over again, and he had a relationship with the Eclectic Medical Institute, which was the medical school. That was the last eclectic medical school in existence in the United States, and that was here in Cincinnati. And so, he really applied his scientific pharmaceutical mind to herbal medicine. And you can really see that. And I can't even tell you how many times I've been in the back offices of very high to do herbal companies in the United States, and they have King's volumes 1 and 2 on their desk. So this is, there's some wacky stuff in there that I'll flip and I'll be like, what? But, by and large, the information really stands true to this day, which is so incredible. The work that they were both doing has held up over 125 years. So it contains botanical descriptions, history of use, chemical composition, actions, medical uses, specific indications, and dosage. It's a rich source of ethnobotanical information. I mean, because Lloyd was a pharmacist, I mean, that was at a time when pharmacists were also botanists, which were pharmacognosist, which, you know, were chemists. I mean, they did everything. People would bring in raw plant material. So it just pulls in a lot of different kinds of information and very like practical, tactile, visual ways of assessing. So as you can see from the handout, I really can only talk about a smattering of the books that I really love. So these are just 3 that are listed on the additional reading, but they're also great to check out. And we've got 2 out of the 3 up there. But Spiritual Herbalism is by Karen M. Rose, who has Sacred Vibes Apothecary in New York City. She, has made just a lovely text for folks. Held by the Land is by Lee Joseph. She's an ethnobotanist, and she's from the Pacific Northwest tribe, north of Seattle in BC. And she also has a product company, but she's a student of Nancy Turner. So for folks that are into ethnobotany, Nancy Turner is a lovely human and ethnobotanist. And you can really hear some of those voices really shine through Lee's work. And then The Business of Botanicals by Anne Armbrecht. If you buy teas, if you get stuff from Kroger, if you use herbs in supplement forms, The Business of Botanicals really goes behind the scenes. And this is notoriously a very opaque industry. People are very territorial about their wildcrafting information, where they get stuff, who's working for them. I mean, I've had to sign a lot of NDAs because you can't talk about any of this stuff. And Anne Armbrecht, because she's an anthropologist, and she just got in with the right people, and they gave her a lot of information. And so you're really able to get a clear sense of the challenges of the botanical herb industry, both in the United States as well as in England and India. So I use a lot of these books in my practice. So, I do herbal consultations and therapeutic body work. I do product making and custom formulations. And so these are many of the books that I will reference when I'm putting together formulas for individuals and when I'm crafting products. And in my educational classes, I always have a slide. If there's a PowerPoint presentation like this, I really like the hands-on component of a workshop and a slide presentation. But I always talk about books. I'll name 4 or 5 that people can just get to know. So I do educational classes all over the city. And then there's the photo in the bottom middle, and that's at the community garden over in Walnut Hills. And then upcoming classes and events. So I have a monthly herbal lecture series that's at the heart of Northside, so over across from the Northside Library where the market is on Wednesdays. And so my lecture is the last Tuesday of every month from 6 to 7 p.m. And it's in the sanctuary space, and there's usually around 20 people or so that come. So it's a more cozy, intimate way of learning about herbs. And I always bring teas. So the ones that are coming up would be A to Z of Herbal Formulations is May 28th. June 25th is Supportive Plants for Queer Health. And July 30th is Cool Off with Herbs Herbal Iced Teas. And there'll definitely be herbal iced teas to sample for that one. And then I have an herbal tincture making workshop that's in my office, Apothecary, and that's June 1st. And that will include all materials to start building your home apothecary. And then most Thursdays from 9:30 to 11:30, you'll find me in the Walnut Hills Community Garden over on Melrose. And so I just do a lot of organic teaching in the garden space. There's kids that come from the school down the street. There's volunteers from all over the city. Sometimes we're harvesting valerian roots. Sometimes we're planting seeds. Sometimes we're just weeding. But I always bring herbal iced tea for that too. So if you are interested, you can just email me and I can give you more information. And then there's, you're welcome to sign up for an email list you can just send me an email really, and then I'll sign up you on my email list. And if you're on social media, then I'm under Okatio Herbals. And I always post all my info to my website, so you can always find everything there. That's it. Are there any questions? There's some space. There's also a lot of the books that I talked about are up here on this table. So feel free to come up and check them out. And then I've got handouts in the back. If anybody didn't get a handout, make sure to take that with you, and then you can look up some of those additional books. And then I have a brochure or two and business cards if you'd like. Yeah.
When I look at your bibliography, you have one book that was published in 1898 and everything else was published after 2000.
Yeah.
Did nothing happen in that?
Oh, no. Lots. I was really trying to highlight more exciting recent publications because I think that there's a ton of gems that have been published, especially in the past 5 years. There's just been an explosion of great books. But there's plenty of books that I use that are, published in like the 60s and 70s. There's a different way of kind of talking about herbs from that time. So sometimes those can be a bit lacking in transparency about where the information comes from. So I feel like for the really old books, they have a different style that I think works really well with how I think about herbs now. And then the modern books, I think, are just very visually appealing and makes the information accessible to a lot of folks. But yeah, I'm happy to share other ones if you want to send me an email. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are these classes on your website?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, they're in person, but they're listed on my website.
Yeah, so
yeah,
for planning purposes.
Yeah. Any other questions, Bob? Yeah.
I have a couple. Oh, I'm sorry. She can go first.
Oh, well, I was curious, this June 25th class, like what elements of queer health are covered?
Yeah, really thinking about hormone support and nervous system support. Specifically thinking about how can we support the queer community to just be vibrant and excited about being alive. And I think that there's a lot of intense things that are happening right now, and it's happening for everybody, but for the queer community, they're at a higher risk in some regard. Yeah.
I'll be there.
Okay. I will too. Yeah.
Do you do any work at the Osher Center for Integrative Health at the University of Cincinnati? It seems like your work would fit in with a lot of things that they do over there.
Yeah, I have been hearing about them for years, and we've sort of just been ships passing in the night, but I would like to. I'm very interested in what they've got going on over there.
Yeah. I'm a firm believer in what they do. I'm actually a patient at that center.
Yeah.
And the other question I have, if somebody in one of those books, they recommend some kind of herbal, and I don't want to make it, and I go to a local store, is there any way to judge the quality?
That's a very loaded question, for sure. Yeah, I could give a talk about that in and of itself. There's really great companies out there, and there's a lot of really terrible companies out there. And I have my preferences for like what I recommend to folks. And I mean, when I see clients, like I recommend, products via an online dispensatory. But there's certain brands that I think do a really good job of sourcing and transparency. Things to look for would be Fair Wild certification if a company is a B Corp, although I have mixed feelings about that because now like large corporations that do nefarious things are also somehow B corporations. But I look for, again, like transparency around, are they supporting their farmers? Are they, are they trying to source as much as they can domestically? Is it a seed to shelf company where they're growing the plants that then they process and then turn it into a final product? So it's a big topic for sure.
Sometimes it's hard to find the background because if you go and buy that, whatever the capsule is, you really have no idea what's in that, the percentage, how it was grown, if there's any strange things that were absorbed through the plant and ended up in final processing. It really is a tricky way. It's like a minefield.
Yeah. I mean, GMP compliant companies that are out there, they typically will advertise that they're GMP compliant. I mean, some companies that I really love would include Banyan Botanicals, Herb Farm, Gaia Herbs. I think that those three are great about sourcing and treating their employees really well and doing testing. I mean, any large herbal company is going to be subject to FDA inspection. And they have to, I mean, that's another topic in and of itself, you know, but like, you know, herb companies have to define, they have to say like, okay, well, we're gonna do these 5 things for every time an herb comes in to verify its identity and that there's no heavy metals. Maybe they test every 10th batch, you know, they have to have like a recipe. And then when the FDA inspector comes in, they want to see the paper trail, because if it's not written down, then it didn't happen for the FDA inspector, because they inspect pharmaceutical corporations as well as herbal companies, because that's the way that we set it up. So, there's definitely some keys to like look for, you know, as far as GMP compliance, B Corporation, Fair Wild certified, ROC certified, which is regenerative organic certification. That gives you some perspective on like they're taking care of the land and the people that are working the land. And for something to be regenerative organic certified, it means that it has to be certified organic. And then if it's ROC certified, then they have to be enriching the soil. They have to, if they have animals, they've got to treat them well. If they have employees, you know, they have to offer them benefits and like so on and so forth. Yeah. Yeah.
As I've aged, I've noticed that pharmaceuticals, when you're prescribed one, while they may have been tested on a young person, they sometimes will knock you flat.
Mm-hmm.
And they seem very strong.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've tried to look at other ways of dealing with problems, and organics and these kinds of products. It's hard to tell sometimes because they're slower, but they're usually a lot more gentle at addressing certain issues.
Mm-hmm.
And I also find the medical community sort of slow to accept that idea.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely naturopathic physicians that are going to be more geared towards integrating those two, although some naturopathic physicians are going to lean more on nutraceuticals, which there's a lot of I have mixed feelings about nutraceuticals.
What is nutraceutical?
Nutraceuticals are like high grade concentrations of herbal extracts or vitamins. They can be very helpful and totally appropriate, but sometimes there's still like a big disconnect, you know, between like where the thing that, you know, if you're taking berberine, you know, as a capsule and it's very concentrated, that would be considered like a nutraceutical. You know, it's still totally disconnected from like, wait, where does this berberine come from? You know, is it from golden seal? Is it from, you know, coptis? Is it from like all these different sources, these plant sources of berberine? And, you know, sometimes they can be in like really high concentrations. So, I mean, I think like nutraceuticals can be helpful in some situations. And then also, you know, if somebody's really sensitive, then sometimes it still can be problematic. But I mean, naturopathic doctors like have a deep background in more integrative, holistic support. I mean, herbalists, same thing. Like you'll find like whole food nutritionists. And so sometimes the whole food nutritionists will also incorporate herbs and supplements into it. So I think, and you know, there's also like great integrated physicians out there, but oftentimes they're part of like, you know, expensive private practices. So yeah, that can be a financial factor. Yeah. Yeah.
Megan, thank you so much.